This is a University of Otago podcast.
Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the second session of S3. I see lots of familiar faces in the audience, so welcome back. It's lovely. And for the new ones, I'd just like to let you know that this is an experiment. What we're doing here, it's an experiment based on the premise that people who come to university are intelligent and curious, and that intelligent conversation is one of the best things that can happen here. So we want to promote more of that and give you an opportunity to mix it in a little bit with academics and students in S3. So for that reason, we also have a slight change in the format this time, because we have, for the first time, a student discussant. This is Cameron Toogood, who, through his enthusiasm following last week's session, finds himself sitting in this chair. Now, that doesn't prevent any of you asking questions or commenting while we're going, but we will try to have enough time at the end to call for questions from the floor. So don't fret if you don't get to interrupt during the proceedings, you can at the end. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Elaine Webster. I'm the Director of Summer School and Continuing Education, and I have a wonderful set of guests tonight. We have here Professor Jules Kaiser, who comes to us from South Africa, and has practiced, who was born and educated there and practiced as a dentist in outback South Africa, London and Johannesburg, and received his doctorate in 1989 while still practicing, so working and studying. There's so many ways to get to the top, but I think you have to be extremely hardworking. It seems to be par for the course. So anyway, he was appointed a reader and honorary professor of anatomy at Wits. And in 1996, he was appointed chair and head of Department of Oral Sciences at Otago, and in 2009 was appointed inaugural director of the Sir John Walsh Research Centre, which is for dental research. Jules has published extensively in craniofacial biomechanics, forensic biology, and also some education research, and is very well known in summer school for his forensic biology paper. Dr. Sian Halcrow completed her has completed her PhD at Otago in 2007 and worked as a postdoctoral fellow in the Department of Anatomy here before becoming a lecturer in 2010. Sian studies infant and child biology from archaeological sites and is currently working on several multidisciplinary archaeological projects in Southeast Asia and Chile, and also collaborates on projects working with ko iwi tangata. Sian has secured several research grants, including a New Zealand Fulbright Travel Award and, very impressively, a Marsden Fast Start grant. And last year she was the recipient of an Otago Early Career Award for Distinction in Research. So she's also published a lot, and she lectures in the summer school paper Introduction to Biological Anthropology. Dr. Kate Voelker also completed her PhD at Otago in 2012, but she did her undergraduate study at Goethe University, presumably in Germany. She's a lecturer in 2013 summer school, where she teaches the Theology and Religious Studies paper Women in Islam. Kate has tutored and been a guest lecturer in the department since 2008 and has published on the Quran and Muslim thought, also contributing to national and international conferences. And just briefly again, Cameron is a second-year student at Otago who is majoring in neuroscience, and in summer school he's studying forensic biology and human nutrition. So we have a really nice mix of guests here tonight, and I hope that through the conversation you'll see some of the synergies actually in what they're doing. But our question today continues the question that we asked last week, because it was such a fruitful one. We thought it was well worth developing. So please tell us how your work addresses the challenges facing the world today. And we'll start with maybe 5 to 10 minutes from each speaker and then sort of open it up from there. And perhaps we could start with you.
Working. Good evening, everybody. I think this is such a huge subject that you couldn't possibly touch on everything, but one facet for me of my work that really interests me and worries me and keeps me awake sometimes thinking about it is the increasing use of child soldiers in informal combat. So formal combat is like when New Zealand decides to invade Germany or France, and the New Zealand army gets onto its only boat, and it goes over to Normandy, and it lands there and invades France, right? That is a formal, they declare war, and everybody knows if you're on this side or that side who you belong to. There are a lot of wars that are not like this. You'd be brain dead if you didn't know where they were. There's a lot of them in the Middle East, North Africa, Central Africa, South America as well, where just armies are fighting one another. CNN tends not to be there. ABC is not there. TV News 1 is not there. We're not there. Nobody really knows what happens there. Nobody actually cares. And a lot of the people who fight are young children. And that worries me a lot. Over to you.
Thank you for having invited me today. It's an interesting experience for me. And so what keeps my work interesting is a kind of portraying of Muslims who try to keep alive their way of living a religious or Islamic life today without compromising their ideas of liberty and equality and democracy, human rights, etc. So I am particularly interested in reform movements and ways of thinking within Islam that practices a what some of the scholars call archaeology of mentalities. So all these kind of streams of thinking that have been marginalized in Islamic history and have been dominated by a proclaimed orthodoxy, which says now what is Islam to be and how it all should be. And we have a growing body of scholars, thinkers, and students who try to rethink that today and try to reshape their understanding of religion and thereby try to keep a religion alive and meaningful. And yeah, so I'm looking at scholars that are usually alive today, so I'm interested in contemporary thinkers that I can actually call up and ask if I understood their work right. People I can conduct interviews with and try to get their ideas right. So I'm not arguing in my work from within an Islamic perspective, but I have a lot of sympathy for their course, and I'm interested in teaching their ideas and promoting this reform movements or the knowledge about reform movements in Islam. Thanks.
Tēnā koutou katoa. My name's Sian, and as Elaine said, I lecture in biological anthropology, and I'd like to say a big thank you to Elaine for organising this. I think it shows her dynamic way of thinking and also trying to incorporate students more into summer school and what they want to get out of it. I'm an archaeologist, I'm a bioarchaeologist, so I look at human bones from archaeological sites, and when I was a student, people would always say to me, so what's your degree going to get you? What are you going to get out of it? And I think that this kind of is really related to the main theme of what we want to talk about today, is how my research or our research actually relates to or can be applied to the modern world today. I've got an arts background and I've also got a scientific background. I'm based in anatomy, but I'm an archaeologist and an anthropologist. And my work focuses on looking at mainly the effects that the origins and intensification of agriculture had on people in the past. And I look at infants and children, because infants and children, as you know, they're actively growing. They're very sensitive barometers or indicators of stress of a population as a whole. And I think this is relevant to the world today because we don't hear about it much, living in the country that we are, because we are we were very lucky that we're living in a developed country, if you want to call it developed, and that over half of the population, and the majority of those are infants, children and women, are actually going hungry and have got diseases, malnutrition, and living in a cycle of poverty. And this actually stems ultimately from the intensification and the adoption of agriculture. It's also to do with industrialisation and stuff as well, but this is when the major changes occurred. So most lay people would think that, oh yes, agriculture, this is good, it's solved all the problems of the world, but in fact it's made life much harder. It's obviously led to population growth, overcrowding, unsanitary living conditions, and I could go on, but it's probably quite obvious to you. Do you want me to keep on going? Yeah. Like Jules said, it's impossible to go over and summarise all the work that we do, but I just wanted to touch on some examples of how my work directly affects communities today and some of the problems that are challenging communities today. As Elaine said, I work on projects, joint projects with local iwi and other iwi in New Zealand, looking at their koiwi or skeletal remains. And we're involved in a project before the repatriation of the Wairau Bar skeletal remains. The Wairau Bar is probably the most famous archaeological site in New Zealand. It is the earliest, it's up in Marlborough, it's by Blenheim, it's got the earliest radiocarbon dating, and the material culture suggests that also that there are very, very early colonisers. And this received a lot of media attention in 2009. The University of Canterbury were actually looking at, they had the bones under their care, and Rangatane, the local iwi up in Blenheim, wanted to get them back. So they came to an agreement that if all the bones were studied again, we could then repatriate them, and that's what happened. So reburied them. And it was a long, long process. It took years of consultation with the iwi. But in the end, it was a very fruitful process for them, because they could, it was a grieving process for them as well, but they found out a lot about their ancestors, and they learnt about things that we could look at their bones and tell them about, so their age and their sex and their quality of life and other things like that. And they were very happy for that, and that's a collaborative process, and they've also been involved with our research outputs, our journal publications and the like. And I was very happy to hear that just recently the area has been made a Wahi Tapu area under the New Zealand Historic Places Trust, so it's now got more legal status, so it's got, it's got more protection through DOC and the Historic Places Trust, so people can't go there fossicking anymore and stuff like that. I've got heaps of other examples, but I'll hand over.
Well, just to ask a direct question just to Jules, actually, because one came up while you were speaking and I wanted to just throw something out there. But I wanted to ask you, you were talking about the increasing number of children involved in these sort of non-official conflicts, or these less well-known conflicts. And I suppose one example of that, which I remember being quite big but also very short-lived, was the Coney thing that went down. And I was wondering, do you think the way that we learn about these things happening and the journalism involved with this is changing? And is it because that was spread a lot through social media, and I think that drew a lot of interest to a conflict that many people didn't necessarily know about, and it also drew it to people who were not academics, who were people like myself who were entering academics, or sort of your younger generation as well. And I think I was just wondering, do you see that being a changing environment and how we promote the understanding of this?
Wow. Can I just have a little drink of... Now, first of all, I clean forgot to thank Elaine for organising this and for all of you for coming. And I want to thank you for a particularly good, intelligent question. One of the answers is that I resent the fact that you think that I am a scholar or an academic and you're not. You are more of a scholar than I am, because my brain is fossilized already, and I've got all my fixed ideas. You are the one who's got all the new ideas and everything. So if this was a race, we'd be passing. So never think of yourself as not a scholar. Never not take yourself seriously. It's a double negative, but you know what I mean. No, the Coney case is a very good, excellent example. Who of you have ever heard of the Coney case? So everybody was going to find this guy and shoot him, right? And the CIA was spending a lot of money, and the EU was spending money, right? And they're all going to go to Africa to find this bloke and kill him. Do you want to tell me what happened to him? Nobody knows. No, I don't know. I have no idea. Does anybody know? A lot of money has been spent. They made a YouTube video of him.
I'm fairly sure that they didn't catch him at all. I think people just lost interest after a while. It moved on to the next big topic. Yeah.
I don't know nothing about him. I don't know if he actually has a child army or anything. Maybe he has, maybe he hasn't. But let's face it, who cares? And that's terrible. The other thing that links to this is this, that if a serviceman from a different country, let's say Australia or France or Germany or whatever, or America, if they kill or rape somebody, kill a civilian or rape somebody, there is always an immediate reaction in the press. We don't know what happens to these kids. We are told, and informally we know, when it comes to war crimes tribunals and so on, that they commit some of the most heinous crimes you can think of. So the interesting thing is that nobody talks about it and nobody knows about it, number one. And number two, the reason why we think that if a Kiwi soldier went out there into a little village in Afghanistan and raped a woman, the reason why we condemn it is because we are judging that person in our own milieu, our own background. So our laws, he's subjected to our laws, right? Well, what if you were living in a little African village and they came to your village when you were 4 and you were abducted and serially raped every day till you were 14? That's what happens. Every night you are somebody's little lover. And you're now fighting a war. You think this is normal. This is normality for you. So can you prosecute a child like this, even if they are 17 years old now, for what they have done? Because they might not have thought of this as a bad thing. So it's very, very hard for me to answer this sort of question. The other thing that Sian, I don't want to get too depressed about all this, that Sian mentioned is aging. So she does a lot of aging, and she's interested in how children benefit or don't benefit from industrialization or agriculturalization or whatever. Well, I'm very interested in what is a child. Like, we say a child is 16 is not a child anymore. When in New Zealand, 80% of under 16-year-olds, I'm told, already have regular sex. So are our sex laws outdated? What is a child? When in Sharia law, and we have a very interesting case right now that I was involved in, for instance, the death penalty cannot be sought for somebody who is under 16 because they're a child. Well, I don't know, what is a child, and how do you determine the age of a child? How do you guys determine your age? You ask Mummy, when were you born? Right? But a lot of these kids have no idea. They don't know when they were born. They don't even know who Mum and Dad are. They haven't got a clue. They don't have any documentation. They've never had a birthday. They've never been told. They don't even know what a calendar is. So when are they 16? So those are the issues, I think. Sorry, long answer to a short question.
Thank you. Sian, did you have anything to add to that? Or was there anything you wanted to say?
I just wanted to ask Jules about the role of the UN in what's happening with them, or this is just kind of like a place that they're not going to until it stops. It just seems like, things have to be over, for 30 years before they go to do the Khmer Rouge, tribunal or whatever. So do you have any idea? I mean, it's something that I don't follow.
If you read one book this year, read the following book. It's called Emergency Sex. It is a fabulous book. You read it? You liked it? Have you guys read it? It was written, one of the authors is a Kiwi, the other one's an American, right? And they were both fired for writing the book. They were fired from the United Nations for writing the book. And remember, our ex-prime minister's there, which we won't keep this political. But anyway, what they did was, it is one of the most honest books you will ever read, right? And these people work for the United Nations, and they get sent to the hot spots of the world. And it illustrates the absolute desperation that people have on the forefront of United Nations work. So we see Helen Clark in the United Nations, we see Kofi Annan in the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon, and they go from one dining room to another one, swanning around and driving around in cars and staying in good hotels. But that's not what the United Nations is all about. The United Nations is about these poor people who work and get paid almost nothing, and they have to shut up, because if they don't, they get fired. And this book is absolutely required reading for every single human being, I think. Thank you. I don't get a commission on it. And I've forgotten the authors. Can you remember the... Yeah, I mean, you cannot forget the title. Go to Whitcoulls, and they'll say, "Oh, we haven't got it, but we've got the different shades of grey." Then say, "No. I want the emergency sex one, thanks." And I know they have it at UBS, because it's always, I tell all my students to go and buy it. Otherwise, get it online.
How do we get onto sex? This is really interesting. We've come from forensic dentistry, forensic biology, and women in Islam, and archaeological remains. I mean, it's really interesting. I guess one of the key themes could be, that we're all human. This is all about interested in bodies and humans, and how, sexuality is very much a part of being human. I guess it makes me wonder a little bit more about what your work is, Kate, and how, I mean, our understandings of Muslim society and culture and religion are tremendously skewed, coming to us as they do through ignorance and the media, I guess. It'd be really interesting if you could tell us a little bit about some of that thinking that you have been looking at from those Muslim scholars of late. Perhaps that could relate to sexuality in the Muslim context.
I have one student who submitted a proposal for research, and she wanted to inquire Muslim women and sexuality. And I said, try maybe, because it's a difficult topic, and try maybe to focus on the concept in Islam that is called modesty. And there's a sociologist, Ingelhardt, in Europe, who is conducting the so-called world value study project, and he finds out that one of the main differences between the civilizations, so to say, or the religious cultures, is not so much adherence to democracy or believing that religious leaders should not be in the political elite, etc., but that the main difference might be between Muslim cultures and non-Muslim cultures on the basis of ethics, and especially moral conduct and social conduct. And this is, of course, because in many understandings of how to run a Muslim country, the Sharia law is still influencing, especially the personal status law and the family law in the countries. And this means that the constitutions of Muslim countries often speak of equality, but then certain ideas about how women should behave in society are then confined by family law and the personal status law informed by Sharia. And there we find a lot of challenges for Muslim women today, in the non-Muslim speaking world and in the Muslim speaking world alike, because there are certain expectations that are to be met in the field of modesty. And so I like to shift this discussion from sexuality to this idea of modesty often. Yeah, don't know if that helps, but...
It's very interesting hearing you speak about that, because I think I grew up in Asia, and I grew up with good friends of mine who were Muslim, and seeing them go from, every day seeing their face to then they had a veil on their face, and that was the last time I saw 2/3 of their face. And it was bizarre for me at the time, but I think it didn't take me very long to understand that this is just part of their culture, and for me, living in a country that was very different to what my own nationality of New Zealander is, because I grew up in Singapore. I think I was perhaps more ready to accept this difference in culture. But I think when you live in I'm just proposing an idea here. Perhaps when you live in a country like New Zealand, and if you're a New Zealander and it's your own country, maybe when you have people that come into the country who have different cultures, and you didn't grow up yourself in a different culture, understanding and indeed even being able to comprehend people's differences in culture, I think is something that's very important, but perhaps something that's also very difficult for a lot of people. And it's really interesting. I think with the veil thing, it's something that's very controversial, and people tend to... I've seen people who, by all respects, completely reasonable people who have been totally opposed to it for some of the most bizarre reasons. And I think it's something which is very subjective and has had a lot of discussion about it. Maybe you could talk about that.
Yeah, so the veil is, of course, a very topical, exciting, aspect of Islamic practice. And it was when I started to study at university, in the news all the time. And I thought, I don't know, I do not really learn about Islam here. I read all these snippets from the media and the problem of a teacher in my federal state Hessen that wanted to teach mathematics and wasn't allowed with the hijab, and so there were all these discussions, and we have to fight for our constitutional rights and keep our country, our women in our country liberated, and all these things. And I thought, this does not help me to understand really why women wear the hijab, and what does it mean to them. And so, of course, you have to study and talk to people and get deeper understanding of the culture. What migrant women that come from Muslim countries and wearing the hijab in non-Muslim countries sometimes experience is a mixture of course, not being the established group, being in a weaker status, maybe having to redefine identity. What am I now here in this so different culture? And they are sometimes facing a mixture of xenophobia or Islamophobia, or it's just different, yeah. And then people don't know how to relate. So one of my colleagues, for example, came one day and said, "Oh, I was so personally assaulted last time. I met this woman and she didn't shake my hand." And I was like, "Yeah, but maybe this is, you might find that." Impolite, but try to understand where she comes from, and then it will be easier to understand. So it's all about learning and being open. And but I think minority women who have this outside sign of being different have quite challenges in our society.
Thank you. If I could just direct a question to all of you, actually, because this is something that I find very interesting. You're all lecturers with these very specialised courses. Which are quite unique courses in many ways, and quite exciting courses, which I think is a common theme at Otago Summer School, where they take these sort of very different papers and then get people to introduce you to them. What do you think is the big motivator, just to each of you, what do you think is the big motivator for people to take your particular paper? What sort of person do you think comes into that? And then is there something very key that you hope you will pass on to those students that is a big driver for you when you're teaching them?
Sex rears its ugly head. Who's doing FORB? Well, of all the students we have, and of all the postgrads I've ever had, and if I go to a friend, I'm a dentist, so I'm schizophrenic. I go to dental conferences and they are nice and boring. And they talk about teeth and how to make money out of teeth and all this sort of stuff. And then we get the interesting forensic conferences that are seriously cool, and you have no idea what people talk about there. Really good stuff. Yeah, but my postgrads, the international conferences, and your class that you are in are 99% female. Also, the best crime writers are females. So when you ask me why do people do this, I start saying, why is it that women make better crime writers than men? Why is it that disproportionately in science there are two fields dominated by females? The one is primatology, because they study apes and things, and 90% of primatologists are females. And in forensic science. Maybe you guys have got some answers for me. I've got my own little views on it, but let's hear your views first.
In bioarchaeology, 99% female. I'm not sure why. The students aren't necessarily, there are males that come and do it. And I think that's because you can do Biological Anthropology 201 as a science paper, so they might be doing an anatomy course or something like that. But professionally, 99% are female. And I think it's because it's seen as a soft science, unfortunately. It's multidisciplinary, I suppose. We straddle both the arts and the science, but forensic anthropology would probably be seen as more scientific, so I'm not sure how you could answer that.
Two theories. I'll tell you the one that I don't believe in, and that is that women have dirtier minds than men. And I know that men have cleaner minds than women, definitely, and I can prove that for anybody. Is anybody upset about that statement? I'll prove it to you right instantly, right now.
Yeah.
You are? You're offended by it. Good. Men have cleaner minds than women because they change them more often. The other reason why I think forensic science and forensic anthropology and bioarchaeology, etc., is dominated, and primatology dominated by females, is because these are very practical sciences. And I think females are very, very practical people. They're practical thinkers, they're good problem solvers, and they've been excluded for many, many years from physics and chemistry and God knows what else that have been these sort of male-dominated areas. And they managed to find their way into new areas that men maybe didn't dominate so much, and they've grown very well in those areas. So watch this space.
It's actually a research area that I'm going to start looking to look at. But it's quite interesting hearing that it actually is relevant to forensics as well. I didn't realise that, so thank you.
It strikes me in that same way. I went to one of your forensic biology lectures last summer school, and I was being completely squeamish, a bit appalled to realise I'd come accidentally to the lecture where it was a blood splatter. And I was stuck in the middle and I couldn't leave. And then I was really amazed to discover how, through the skill of the presentation, that actually it was a kind of very similar to my own background in material culture study, which also relies on careful observation, training of visual capacity to recognise detail and understand it and make sense of it, relying on what you can discern and observe. So the teaching enabled me to distance from any kind of visceral response to it and become quite objective, and it was fascinating. So I guess I could sort of buy your theory a little bit, being kind of a practical person myself. I mean, why am I practical? Because I'm a woman? Maybe I was so busy defending myself from rape, that I had to notice the environment more. I'm not sure why women develop these things, but I guess that's another theory we could discuss. I mean, if you have people considering whether you should take someone to court and if they're a child or not and convict them for rape, actually I'd start to wonder what about the women who were raped, and what you're going to do about them while you're discussing the children. But I don't know about what you do, bioanthropology. Would you say that's also a area which is very much based on observation and analysis?
I started my Bachelor of Arts up in Auckland, and we learned a lot about evolutionary theory, and it wasn't very practically based. And then I came down, and Jules was one of my teachers in bioanth, and Hallie Buckley and Nancy Taylor, and I was just struck when I went into the lab and I was looking and touching these bones and actually feeling like I was learning something, and it was practical and I could use it in the future. And that was something that was very different to what I'd ever done before. I mean, I'd taken biology and done experiments and all that, but it just seemed a little bit airy-fairy. So I think that was, for me, the main reason why I got into bioarchaeology. But in saying that, I also do a lot of theoretical work. Lots of my papers are actually on social theory, what it means to be a child as well. Differences between social childhood and biological, chronological age and stuff like that. So hopefully I've answered your question.
Maybe we should ask Grant to comment on the gender balance in your field, since it could be seen as the opposite to these fields.
Actually, bioethics has always been dominated by the medical profession from its inception. At the time when the medical profession became the dominant influence, it was dominantly male. It is not going to continue that way, judging by numbers entering medical courses, but it was, and bioethics itself does tend to be dominantly male. I think philosophy has also been a very heavily male-dominated subject, and given that bioethics is the coming together of medicine and philosophy, that's probably why it is that way. But I must say I'd be very interested to hear the panellists comment on a strand that I can see running through what's going on. It's a strand of tying observations and experience together into a coherent whole. Now, we know, for instance, that a woman is born with a much thicker corpus callosum than a man. The corpus callosum is the fibre tract that connects both hemispheres of the brain. So a woman's problem-solving abilities tend to much more implicate both sides of the brain than a man's, who tends to settle on one side or other of the brain to solve the problem with. So it's either settled very spatio-geometrically or it's settled very verbally. But a woman, if you put her in a functional MRI and look at what's going on in her brain, there's a lot closer balance between the two. Now, what strikes me about bioanthropology, and I must say forensic anthropology, is the need to take observations and tie them together with a very human story. A story of a human group and the way they've adapted to a particular context, or an individual and what's happened to them in their life and what's brought about their death. I'm also interested in the fact that disparate strands of scholarly thinking have, in every faith tradition, caused to separate out from the orthodoxy, which is usually a politico-religious synthesis, a strand of scholarly thought that is inherently problematic. And almost every major faith tradition reserves this enclave for problematic thinkers, to think through basic texts, to bring them into contact with contemporary situations, to disrupt orthodox received patterns of wisdom that are generated out of these politico-religious syntheses. And this strand of bringing together disparate facts, disparate observations, disparate experience, disparate strands of thinking, and trying to make something coherent out of them is, I think, something that women are actually quite well equipped for. And I wonder how the panellists would respond to that.
Thank you.
We exclude you now. I feel with religious studies it is that reading tradition and cultures, looking at the history, it often excludes the history of women. It excludes what happened to the women of that time. It's often the history of Islam, for example, the history of the conquests, on the history of politics, and you wonder, there is a huge gap and missing of missing women and women history. So what is now happening is that these critical scholars really try to dig deep and reconstruct and do some kind of archaeology and find out where is this missing piece, and is part of our identity. Yeah, if we in our history, also in non-Islamic history of women, is a huge gap missing. And it is important for us because we want to know how a 7th century woman was supported by her community while giving birth or in different situations. and what practices were at that time working for the society. And we can learn from that. Yeah, we don't have to apply it, but it's nice to know. And we can critically assess it and say, oh, okay, there might be an inspiration from the past that we have to reconsider and that has been forgotten. And women are good, I think, in trying to link back maybe to the other generations. They want to find a line of, I don't know, linking or healing, understanding. I don't know if that's a typical female thing, but yeah. In my course also, more women, of course. We have one male on campus, but yeah, most women. Mm.
Did we hear you say you're a female, Jules?
You all think I'm a male. Yeah, this is very, very interesting, I must say. Fascinating stuff. The other interesting thing that links up with what you said, Grant, is we have found traditionally that it's difficult to communicate science to school kids because school kids think science is like do-it stuff, which it is. Science is boring stuff. And us older people all benefited from one or two charismatic people, and there was a guy called Roger Moore in the UK who talked about the planets and everything, and it's junk. It's never influenced my life, but I love this bloke, and I bought all his books, and we all used to think about all these galaxies and so on that I've never seen, and they don't influence my life, but good science communication is really cool. But what we find is that a lot of girls get involved with science through forensics because they watch CSI, they watch Bones, etc., and they're actually, I never watch Bones, and the once or twice I've watched it, I try and look down the neckline of the girl who's the main actress, and I check out her legs and that sort of stuff. But the girls who are watching this are watching it for the science, and they're fascinated by this, and that's often their entry point into doing science. So I think we should use more of forensics, and that's one of the reasons why I do this, is to try and capture more people into science through forensics. So when I go to Kavanagh College or Otago Girls High or Queen's College or whatever, and I talk to the final year students there, they love it because you can see these young minds thinking, wow, this is science. So you can use a maggot. This is such a cool experiment. You can give somebody a drug, like a mouse. You give a mouse a drug. Then they die because you give them an overdose of that drug. Then you cut open their brains and you take all the brains out and you put them in a food mixer. And then you do gas chromatography on that. Then you feed this all to maggots. And the maggots get fat and big, and then you put them into a liquidizer, and then you use chemical means to see if they've actually got the drug in them. How cool is that? It is cooking. You want to taste it?
I remember some of the things that were talked about last week as well, which were the philosophers who, I can't remember if you supported this or not, Grant, but you talked about how the human conception of everything is partly created through the reality of having a body and living in the world, so that we kind of what we can and do imagine is bounded and structured in some really deep ways of that, and the experience of being born and being cared for, in whatever way, so that actually, and I think in terms of a gender debate, that's quite an interesting point that we're looking at. If you think that women are interested in, therefore, the products of science, if you're interested in a forensic biology, because you would actually end up with a result. You're not sort of throwing your effort into a kind of always a future forward sort of great plan or a great answer to, you know, science never ends, does it? It's a continual development. But actually some kind of inquiry which has a result strikes me as similar in the sense to the creation of a child through a woman's body.
Sometimes I feel like bioarchaeology and what I do doesn't really have a direct impact or a result. It's very subjective in the way in which we could have multiple types of interpretations of it. And I hate to, you know, use gender stereotypes, so I don't know if that's why women are more drawn into bioarchaeology or not. Definitely the men at the top, they are still there. Apart from the old ones, though, some of them have died recently, so the woman might take over. Yeah, so I'm yeah.
Ask about your background, your study that might show how some of those patterns of social cultural change, whatever, might create those possibilities. This is what Anthropology is about.
Yeah. So I actually started off doing more of a social degree. I was doing lots of women's studies and social anthropology, and then came into biological anthropology. So I think that's how I'm probably a little bit different to some of the bioarchaeologists working here. I'm a bit more into social theory, but I also practice traditional bioarchaeological, more scientific methods, which are actually very similar to forensic methods. It's just not as sexy, I suppose. They need to have a bioarchaeologist on CSI, don't they?
I think it's actually really interesting because, I mean, from what I can gather, this is the genders that are involved in these sciences, and this is something I've sort of heard of before, is changing dramatically, and that's something that's also applicable to university. I mean, university used to be very male-dominated and is now increasingly becoming not only just equal, but in fact, I believe there's more females at university. Now, you're shaking your head.
I'll just take over here. There's more females enrolled, and females are doing better than males. However, the university structure in terms of the people that are employed here, there's still a big gender bias.
And we noted, we can't help but notice these things. In the recent appointments of professors, we were really pleased that we had 20% women, and we were told that was quite a good result.
So I think this is something that our preconceptions about how these balances should be is something that's changing a lot. And I think even growing up, you know, children are greatly influenced by what they're told they should be. Boys are told that they should be playing with trucks. Girls are told that they should be careful not to hurt themselves. And so they develop a more fragile state of mind, I suppose. But that's not what I mean, but you understand what I mean. And so I think as this sort of these preconceptions change, that's perhaps the only way slowly that we can have that gradual progression towards a better equality in these fields. I mean, I think it's very interesting to hear both Grant and Jules talk about, or actually all of you talk about how perhaps women are more practical in certain fields, and I think to a degree, biologically speaking, both genders have something which is unique to them to offer to these fields, and that's why it's so important to have inequality. But also very interesting to see when they are dominating as how that changes. I think one of the things, just from talking to Elaine beforehand, one of the things which ties all three of you together to a degree is that you all in some way give voice to people who otherwise are not able to speak for themselves, whether that's people in the past, people who can't speak because they've passed away and it's about reconstructing their life, or people from a completely different culture who perhaps aren't able to express themselves in a new culture. So perhaps you could talk about that. Okay.
I just had an idea when you said maybe there are, or when we all said women maybe are good in that field better or not. What I come across is that feminist Muslim scholars say they don't talk so much about what women are better in or not, or men, but they say that the issues that concern women they don't feel are addressed often. And these family laws, for example, and personal status laws that affect their lives in Muslim countries are a portrait and an interpretation of males for a male society based on scriptures written by males. And it's very difficult for them to at all find grips, and a starting point to make the society understand that actually their issues are ignored, and why should men who never give birth make policies about giving birth, or how that should happen? So they feel a bit undermined, and there's a lot of struggle still ahead in the societies. If you leave one half of the population behind, society cannot progress.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Because then that's starting to suggest there's some other things at play here. There's social forces, there's social structure. I mean, it's kind of interesting that we've got so far in our discussion, which is just after 6, and we've actually ended up talking a lot about gender and gender imbalance, and it's taken us all this time to really start to think of what those forces might be. I would actually love to hear from some other people in the audience at this point, and I'm actually thinking of putting Lynn on the spot. Would you like to make a comment?
Thank you. Okay. My name's Lynn Bowyer. I'm a PhD student in the Bioethics Centre, and I'm currently coordinating the Bioethics and Film course. I think your conversation has now reached a very interesting point when you are looking at the structures that people work within and how that they can actually constrain or empower people. And I think one of the really important things is to see that those structures are held in place by what we do as individuals. So if they're going to change, it's the action of each individual person that's going to bring that change about.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Fine, yeah. Hi, I'm Barry Peake. I'm in the chemistry department. I've been there a long time, as you can see from the grey hair. I teach the summer school course, and it's interesting that about 2/3 or 3/4 of the summer school chemistry course are women, and that's not because I think they're gripped with chemistry, but simply because they need Chemistry 1 to go on and do some other subjects, very few of which are pure chemistry. They're nutrition and anatomy and microbiology and all the rest. I've been fascinated by this discussion tonight because I was thinking about what attracts people to do chemistry or physics or mathematics. And there is a small human element, a relatively small human element in chemistry, but now I think, speaker, I've just forgotten, Sian, spoke about practical, that you like the practical bones. Well, there's plenty of practical work in chemistry, and yet that doesn't necessarily attract women. I think there's other elements that are involved in chemistry. And a lot of chemistry is spent designing new molecules. And I suppose it's hard to see a human connection with the synthesis of new molecules, the material world. And I think that's why there's not so many women. And I think back about who are the Nobel Prize winners in chemistry. There's Madame Curie, and that's about it, I think. It's been very much dominated by men. Grant mentioned the different brain structures that suggest that women are different from men, and I just wonder whether there's something in the brain of women that perhaps lessens their ability to think spatially, to be able to see molecules in space and conceive of new configurations and things. So the other thing is, Jules, I've spent a lot of time at schools, and I've been able to inspire kids. And I'm just very disappointed with the disillusionment of kids. And I think it's because of their teachers who have done no science, or if they've only done science, it's biology, who don't understand science, are frightened by it. And the odd teacher who is keen on it can inspire their kids, and that's what we need to do. So there's lots of issues there.
Anyone else want to say something?
My curiosity won't be quite so broad spectrum, but Islam is famous for being, I'm not sure whether it would be more diverse than a lot of other faiths, but it's certainly famous for being very diverse. And you mentioned that in the past there have been attempts at forming orthodoxies around Islam. And with these new reform movements, I wonder, are these forming new orthodoxies, or are they spreading diversely based on the diverse traditions that they're following from? And secondly, do these developments in reform movements have any impact on ecumenical activities between faiths?
Yes, so Islam is, of course, as diverse as probably other religious traditions. With the reform movements, you have the whole spectrum from right fundamentalist and to very liberal, so you have this entire reform spectrum. And I don't think that yet in the stream that I'm interested in is the humanist reform movement in Islam, that there is any orthodoxy yet established, although there are some principles now already established since, let's say, the late 80s, on which they all base their argumentation. And so it's very similar if you look at the male and the female reform writers in Islam of the 20th and 21st century. They all go back to similar almost doctrines now. Yeah, we can say not orthodoxy. They don't form an orthodoxy. There are not enough people yet to make such claims. But they have a set of beliefs already, which they find more helpful today than others. So, for example, they have the idea that you cannot go around the Quran. You have to go through the Quran to redefine Islam. You have to focus on certain verses in the Quran and read then the others that are more controversial in the light of those that you find more helpful for today. So they make decisions, of course, and axioms on which they are approaching the text. And in that, they find a common ground already. And that's interesting to see, that they have, in a short period, agreed upon a certain set of criteria already on how that reform ought to happen. On the public, on the social basis, that these reform movements might even now be influential. I think of in the European discourse on Islam, where we have many Muslims taking part actively in discourse and redefining Islam. I think your question was that how do these reform movements even be influential now? Is that? Sorry. Oh, yes, sorry. I think they have to. Otherwise, they will not find the support they need in terms of numbers of members. So, for example, the so-called one of the most influential intellectual figures, Tariq Ramadan in Switzerland, when he is speaking, he always tries to speak in a way that addresses both the non-Muslim Westerners and the Muslim community in the non-Muslim countries. So he has to use the language of, he has to use ecumenical language. He has to use Iranic set of terminology in order to link to the audience. It depends, of course, to which audience he speaks, which language he uses. This is often with these reformers, so you have to be critical, you have to read their works and try to understand if they are populists, if they speak differently in front of the camera, or if they are genuine and continuously supporting certain ideas, or if they just want to please an audience. Yeah, so you have to be critical. But I think the idea of living in a multicultural society, you have to use this language of ecumene. Yeah.
we keep coming back to here, one of the things we keep coming back to here, is the way that we're talking about how you need to have this understanding not only of your own culture, but also of other cultures. And that's how you can perhaps start to redefine how you approach your own culture. I mean, one of the things that we were talking about before with Jules and Sian was, what is a child? And that's something that even within Western society has changed so dramatically in 50 years and 40 years. And maybe it's something that gets redefined each generation with how we approach these different cultures and how we approach our own culture. So I think really the message that I'm getting from this is that there's a certain level of understanding that we need of the world in order to perhaps understand ourselves and also the way we're doing things. And I think it's very difficult to comment on something like Islamic law to comment on your own law and contrast it with Islamic law if you don't have an understanding of the people behind that law and the people and the history behind that law. Anything you'd like to say, add to that?
This reform movement in Islam, is that happening in Islamic nations or in communities living in the West?
The reform movements take place mainly in the West and in Southeast Asia. So if you ask, for example, a scholar who just died recently, I asked him, so where do you think the change will come? The Middle East is the hardcore land, but it's not the majority of Muslims do not live in the Middle East and do not speak Arabic. And he says the major change, the most diverse understanding of Islam and open-mindedness will probably come from Southeast Asia. As societies, though, that I have not studied, so I'm interested in the Muslims who teach from within the Western academia, but they all come from Muslim countries. So I look at diverse from Pakistan, from Egypt, Algeria, etc. People who are bridge builders, who bring with them the history and growing up in Muslim societies and then going into a non-Muslim country and teaching within that realm. And of course the critique is, what is their influence radius then, if they leave the homeland? And this will only time will show if this Euro-Islam that Bassam Tibi likes to use, or Western Islam, what influence that might have on the rest of the Muslim world. That will take some time.
Just to bring this back to the sort of modern context that we were aiming with the overall question that we led with ages ago now. It's interesting, when you talk about how these ideas are spreading and saying, well, where are these ideas going to change? And it's interesting from the point of view that I think the way ideas spread now are very different to how they may have spread 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And when you only have to look at things like, I think it was the Arab Spring and a series of revolutions through many different countries, with many different governments, but sparked by an idea of revolution, which began to spread very quickly. And I think it's a big part of perhaps global culture now, that there's a great desire to understand what's going on around the world and how that's relevant to people in their own country and how that's relevant to the individual. And with such easy access, just through internet and through such an open world that it is now, where so many of us are fortunate to have friends or even family in so many different countries, I think our understanding of these things is only going to increase. And because of that, I feel like ideas like this may not be so localized to individual areas, but may in fact spread in all directions and spread quite widely. Is there anything you would say?
I'm struck how easy it is to think about Muslim reform when we don't even... I mean, I know very little about Muslim culture or Islam to begin with. So I wonder if that... It just makes me wonder if we're already trying to fix something. Like we've got this incredibly I don't know what the word is, it's this kind of centric view. We see the world so much from where we stand, we don't even know the extent that we do that, you know, so that when we consider the other, if for example, if I suddenly had to put on a veil, that would mean something completely different to me in my world than it would Muslim woman in Islam. I mean, it would mean something different. It would look like the same thing, but it would mean something different. And I was really interested in that whole debate, actually, that was going on through the 2000s in Europe about all that. And one of the really fascinating things was how easy it is to come down on two sides of that debate really heavily. You can be really assuming that to be able to show your hair is somehow liberating, or to cover up is somehow degrading, or indication that you have no status or choice or control in your life. So I'm quite pleased that we actually have a chance at this university to discuss these questions, mainly because it's a way to bring some understanding into. I mean, this is one of the things we want from a university education, is to understand more about the world we live in, so that we're more critical and can really think about what we're looking at and seeing, even if we don't know something, or we can't hope to become expert in, in any, one field's probably more than most of us can really manage. But actually to have some good questions or an approach to it which will save us from falling into prejudice or stereotype.
I think I'm just trying to find, because you said you're missing the line, so had an idea. So I think it's helpful, first of all, if you are interested in a culture, to go into the country and live there for half a year or longer. That's the best thing, of course. Or take a paper at the university and have a smell, of that topic. And I'm just wondering, because you said you're missing Jill said you're missing an understanding of what childhood means in culture or in different societies. And I'm just wondering, even if you go into the culture and would study the understanding of childhood there, it would probably in the cases you are studying not be so helpful, maybe, because you are studying exceptional cases, I think. Do you think that would be helpful if you have a study available of a country that you are examining, and you have a history and study on the childhood of that country, if that would actually be helpful for your study or not?
I'm not too sure if I understand your question. My understanding of what it means to be a Muslim kid is based on one book, and that is called The Kite Runner. So, I mean, I've never lived in a Muslim country, so I don't know what it's like to be a Muslim child. And we don't need to focus on Muslim all the time. I don't know what it's like to be a Zen Buddhist child or an animist child. I have no idea. I've read a couple of books, but I have no idea. So I can't answer that question. But what I'm interested in is basically just the biology of it. So if we say somebody is underage, what does it mean? How do you determine what is underage? Is it when they get a wisdom tooth? Or is it when they fuse their spheno-occipital synchondrite? Did I get that right? Yes? That's a little bone in your brain.
It's just a joint at the base of your skull. So when it fuses, it means that your skull isn't growing this way anymore. It's early adulthood, however you want to define that. About 18 to 22.
So that's that's within the new definition of adolescence, because our government defines adolescence as ceasing at 25. That's all about street. Well, financial definitions, economics, and then these things drive culture too.
Okay, so I'm supposed to wrap it up. This has just been so interesting, and it's actually gone onto a topic that I know very little about, but you're also talking about dealing and working and living in different cultures, and that's what I do all the time. I work a lot in Southeast Asia. Recently just been in Cambodia, one of the most corrupt places in the world, and it just brings home to me the cultural differences. I also have an issue. I speak fluent Thai. I do most of my work in Thailand, but I don't have much of the language, or very little of the language, Khmer language. And I've been working up in the mountains over the last 2 years on a historic jar burial site, and we were very lucky to have a very experienced guide, and he was managing the site. His name was Chet Wooty, and he's a well-known environmentalist in Cambodia and is friends with the Prime Minister and rubs shoulders with all the big guns, or he did rub shoulders with the big guns. The place we were working in is in the Cardamom Mountains, what I said. It's one of the largest areas of mountains in Southeast Asia. So I suppose it's the largest area of forest left, and it's been logged at an extreme rate. And Chet Wooty was one of the most extreme, I suppose, outspoken person in Cambodia. And he always told us stories about, rubbing shoulders with Hun Sen, the president, and all that kind of stuff. And I thought, these are just jokes, he's not really that high up, is he? Until I saw the BBC news at the end of last year, and he'd been shot and killed by police, through the government. So he lost a dear colleague, dear friend, and it just brought home to me differences in culture. Very lucky to be in New Zealand. But a good thing that has come out of our work through the coverage, the BBC coverage of Chet Wooty's life and death, and our findings. We've got an amazing post-Angkorian jar burial site up there. We've got over 100 individuals with lots of grave goods, beautiful bone preservation. UNESCO's come on board, and other organisations like Flora and Fauna, and hopefully we can start to preserve more of the rainforest up there. So that's good for the communities there. They're going to have a lot more work. They can get employment through being guards and all that kind of stuff. So that's just something that I wanted to share, because it was a loss of a very dear person to me, and quite an extreme example of cultural differences and what you learn about living and studying in other cultures.
Thank you. I think we've sort of done it, haven't we? Is there any questions, any further questions from the floor or comments? Yes? Do you want? Oh, so Robin asked the question of why have we not commented on the Anglican Church's position on the status of women in this country, and I believe you're referring to the deciding that women cannot be ordained as priests in the Anglican Church. Yeah. Any Anglicans here?
I'd have to say that decision very much reflects the fact.
So Grant just said that he thinks that decision reflects the fact that the average Anglican is actually a black African man, and that the idea of conferring equal status on women through the priesthood is anathema to that group. That's a really depressing note to end on. But I can understand that. So the reality of that, I too am grateful to live in this country where we were the first to give the vote to women. Not that we particularly vote now or can enjoy the fruits of voting in the way that we perhaps once did. Certainly wouldn't want to lose that right. I think this university was one of the first in the Commonwealth to allow women to study in a university. We have a fine history of women getting degrees and becoming academics and professionals through this university. All that's pretty good to me. I grew up in a time when there were all kinds of reasons why women could do all kinds of things that our mothers didn't do, and my children are doing things that, my children's generation are doing things that they could not have done when I was growing up. And I guess we have to believe in progress. The Girls Can Do Anything campaign, and now we have people feeling upset because boys need to be also told that they can do anything. Boys can cook, boys can look after children. They're not the same thing. Housework and child rearing is not the same thing. But boys can do that too. I don't know, it's really interesting to think about what equality means. So sometimes I think people think equality means being the same as, and I don't want to be a man. I love being a woman. I wouldn't want to be a man. There may well be some men who would like to be a woman. Not that, you can have surgery, but it's not the same thing. But actually, what does it mean to be equal? What does it mean to be equal? What does it mean to have that access? What does it mean to have that choice? And as Lynn pointed out, it's partly what you do, isn't it? So I'll just thank all my speakers today. Thank you very much, and also my questioners and commenters and commentators from the audience. I really appreciate your intelligence and your thoughtfulness and your engagement. I'm really open to any suggestions for the next session, or if you'd like to take part. And I think I'm just going to let Cameron have the last word.
Don't put me on the spot. So thank you very much. It's been an absolute privilege to be able to speak over here with all three of you, or four of you actually. It's been really interesting. I think what ended up happening with this is that we started with quite broad, and then we ended up going into all sorts of angles about what it is to be a child and feminism and incredibly far topics from what we started with. But I think it was very interesting how we sort of worked our way through that. So thank you very much for that. And I think we can all leave here hopefully with a more advanced, or perhaps having more questions about what it means to have a culture, and what it means to be an individual.